A plain language walkthrough of California's summary dissolution process and Form FL-800, covering every eligibility requirement, the required property agreement, and when you're required to use the regular divorce process instead. What is summary dissolution? Summary dissolution is a simplified version of the standard California divorce process designed for couples with short marriages, no children together, and simple finances. Instead of one spouse filing and the other responding, both spouses file Form FL-800, Joint Petition for Summary Dissolution, together. The trade-off for this simpler process is a strict eligibility test. You do not get to choose summary dissolution just because you and your spouse agree on everything. Both spouses must actually meet every requirement described below. If even one requirement is not met, the case has to go through the regular dissolution process instead. Eligibility Requirements Overview. To use Form FL-800, both spouses generally must meet all of the following at the same time: length of marriage, children, pregnancy, real estate, community property and debt, separate property, spousal support, and property agreement. Every item in this table has to be true for both spouses. There is no partial qualification, and there is no waiver process for the eligibility requirements themselves. Requirement: length of marriage. Generally, you and your spouse must have been married less than 5 years, measured from your date of marriage to your date of separation, not your filing date. This is one of the most commonly misjudged requirements, since people sometimes count from the date they file instead of the date they actually separated. If your marriage is close to the 5-year line, confirm your exact separation date before assuming you meet the requirements. A miscalculated date can mean your FL-800 is rejected after you have already prepared the paperwork. Requirement: no minor children and no pregnancy. Summary dissolution generally requires that you and your spouse have no minor children together, whether born before or during the marriage. It also requires that neither spouse is currently pregnant at the time of filing. This requirement exists because custody, visitation, and child support all add complexity that summary dissolution's simplified process is not built to handle. If you have minor children together or either spouse is pregnant, you will need to use the regular dissolution process, which is described in our guide on how to fill out Form FL-100. Requirement: real estate, property, and debt limits. 3 more requirements deal with what you and your spouse own and owe. No real estate. Neither spouse can own any interest in real property, meaning a house, condo, land, or similar real estate interest. This applies even to a small or partial ownership interest, and even if the property is not the family home. Community property and debt limits. California sets a dollar limit on how much community property acquired during the marriage, and community debt a couple can have and still qualify for summary dissolution. Separate property limits. There is also a separate dollar limit on how much separate property, generally property owned before the marriage or received individually by gift or inheritance, either spouse can hold. These dollar thresholds are set by statute and updated periodically. Do not rely on a specific number you have seen elsewhere. Check the current limits in the official FL-800 information booklet from the California courts, or confirm with your county superior court self-help center before assuming you meet them. Waiving spousal support and the property agreement. 2 more pieces complete the eligibility picture. Both spouses waive spousal support. Summary dissolution generally requires both spouses to give up or waive the right to request spousal support from each other. If either spouse wants to preserve the option of requesting support later, summary dissolution is not available. A signed property settlement agreement. Both spouses must sign a written agreement dividing all of your property and debts and attach it to your filing. This agreement needs to account for everything you own and owe between you, even items below the statutory limits, since it is what documents that you have already agreed on how to divide things. List every asset and debt, even small ones, so nothing is left ambiguous later. State clearly which spouse receives which asset and which spouse is responsible for which debt. Both spouses sign and date the agreement before it is filed with FL-800. How to file FL-800 jointly. Unlike the regular process where one spouse is the petitioner and files first, both spouses file FL-800 together as joint petitioners. There is no respondent, no separate filing fee for a response, and no formal service of process between spouses, since you are filing jointly by agreement. In practice, this generally means both spouses confirm together that every eligibility requirement above is met, complete the FL-800 packet and the written property agreement together, sign the joint petition together, file it with the Superior Court in the county where either spouse has lived for the required residency period. The 6-month waiting period and finalizing your case. Summary dissolution simplifies the paperwork and the filing structure, but it does not shorten California's mandatory 6-month waiting period. That waiting period still has to pass before your dissolution can become final. After the waiting period passes, either spouse can file a request for the final judgment, since both of you already agreed to and signed the joint petition. Because there is no ongoing dispute to resolve, finalizing a summary dissolution is generally more straightforward than finalizing a contested regular divorce, but the timeline floor is the same 6 months. Common mistakes to avoid. Assuming you meet the requirements without carefully checking every single requirement, including the ones that are easy to overlook, like separate property limits or a pending pregnancy. Miscounting the length of the marriage by using the filing date instead of the separation date. Filing without a complete signed written property agreement, or leaving assets or debts out of it. Not confirming the current statutory dollar limits before relying on a number from an old source. Assuming a single spouse can file FL-800 alone, it must be filed jointly by both spouses. What if you do not qualify? If you and your spouse do not meet every eligibility requirement, summary dissolution is not available to you, and that is fine. The regular dissolution process exists for exactly this situation. One spouse files Form FL-100 to open the case, serves the other spouse, and the case proceeds through the standard steps, including the same 6-month waiting period. For a full walkthrough of that process, see our guide on how to fill out Form FL-100. It is worth reading even if you think you might qualify for summary dissolution, since it explains what the fallback looks like if a requirement turns out not to be met. If keeping track of all of this by hand feels like a lot, that is exactly what Virdix is built for. The wizard at Virdix.co walks you through these same questions in plain language and prepares your FL-800 for you. Virdix is a document preparation service, not a law firm. So this is not legal advice, but it can help make sure your paperwork is complete and consistent from the start.